people are slashing these zombies and there's blood everywhere and there's blood look like there's blood in their mouth.
Welcome back to Modern Horror Stories podcast with Dave, Alex, Rosanna, and Jamie. And it's been a long time since our last podcast, but we thought with the return of the 28 Later franchise, we should restart and look at the two movies that came before and then the latest film. And today we're going to look at 28 Days Later from 2002, directed by Danny Boyle. Shall we reveal our scores immediately? So mine is a 5.
I've gone for 8.5.
Mine, it's a 7.5.
Mine is also an 8.5.
Ooh, interesting. Who'd like to give us a synopsis?
I'll give us a synopsis of the film. So, Cillian Murphy, who plays Jim, wakes up in hospital and finds that the place is entirely deserted. There's this very, very famous shot of him walking through an empty London, which even if you haven't seen the film, you will have seen a still of this shot. And he meets up with Naomi Harris and eventually Brendan Gleeson and Brendan Gleeson's daughter. And they end up following a signal going north, which suggests that they have the answer to the infection because there is this rage virus that has escaped. That's why the city's empty. I don't think they're ever referred to as zombies. They're just the infected, which is a trend that we sort of continually see now in zombie films. And as they work their way up towards Manchester, you realize things might not be as idyllic as they seem up there.
Alex and Jamie, you loved it. So tell us why you loved this film.
Yeah, I first saw it, I'm not sure exactly when, but probably around 2003, 2004. And I absolutely loved it. I loved every moment of it when I first watched it. And when I came to watch it again now, perhaps 15 or 20 years since I last saw it, I could still remember everything that happened in the film. So I was like, it's quite amazing because my memory is quite patchy. And yet this film has had such an impact that it's the memory of the whole story, all the scenes has just really stayed with me all this time. There's so much of it I love. I love that there's this sort of constant question in the air of, is this a virus or is this just humanity sort of unleashed, so to speak? And there's lots of glimpses of that in the dialogue, in the opening sequence of all those newsreel footage of like just the immense, horrendous brutality being enacted by humans to other humans without the need for any rage virus. And then there are other moments in the film. Big spoiler: the ending. There's a question mark in Selina's mind: is Jim infected? But really, no. He's just violently defending Selina and Hannah, and but the actions he's taking are very similar to that an infected would take. And also the soldiers get quite philosophical about it. They're saying, you know what I'm seeing now? People killing people. You know what I saw 28 days ago or 4 weeks ago? People killing people. Like it's there's a lot tied in with the reality of humanity in this film. And speaking of humanity, there's so much heart and soul in the film as well. Like it's a catastrophic, apocalyptic monster movie, and yet a huge chunk of the middle of the film is 4 people on a road trip having a really lovely time, watching the horses, having jokes about picnic and sleep, and like just really sharing lovely moments and existing in a sort of harmonious way, and in amongst all of the chaos, which I thought was really special to have that reprieve and that sort of anchoring sort of emotional core to the film.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. A lot of the same reasons that I enjoyed it. One of the reasons that I particularly enjoyed it is because it's so simple. It doesn't feel that it needs to do anything sort of extraneous in order to grab the audience. What it does is it has this brilliant premise or very high concept premise there are zombies. They run very fast. A few people have survived. They need to run in the opposite direction. And that's the premise of many, many zombie films, but it allows it, because it's such a simple premise, just to look at the humanity of the characters, or the lack of the humanity in some of the characters. So yes, later on, we get to Christopher Eccleston, and he is just such a brilliant villain. He does everything in this kind of unemotional, very straight deadpan, and he is utterly terrifying, I think. And it's funny because this was the first time that I watched this film, and everybody talks about Cillian Murphy when they talk about this film. And I'd never heard anybody mention Christopher Eccleston's name when talking about this film. I think for me, that was the standout role because I was properly scared of him. And when there's this is a big spoiler, by the way, for anybody watching, a really, really big one. Christopher Eccleston is explaining why he sent this signal out. And he says about his soldiers, "I promised them women." And Cillian Murphy sprints out of it. And it is the most chilling, disturbing moment in the entire film. And you've seen some really awful, nasty, graphic stuff. But it is so disturbing to see somebody who has removed themselves so enormously from emotion and decency that they are able to do something appalling without kind of the scrapping and the biting and the gnarling of a zombie, just with the words of a person.
Well, you both highlighted a couple of things which I agree with, and there's a lot of great things about this film, and I found it hard to score because there are things I would easily score eight or nine, but there's also things that I would score one or two, and I guess I'm going to put them down to the script. I think because I think this movie thinks it's quite a smart movie, and there's nothing wrong with being a smart movie. But when a movie is a smart movie, I think I want the logic to work a bit more. And for me, the logic didn't work well enough. The London was empty at the beginning, which didn't seem to make any sense. Oh, I just want to say, by the way, there's a little preamble before the empty London scenes, which I really didn't like. And it's set up.
I was actually discussing this. I was discussing this with Jamie just the other day, but I'd quite like to hear your thoughts before James and I share ours.
So I really didn't like it because it spoiled the whole London thing for me. Because we knew there were going to be crazy people out there, people going insane, and blood everywhere, just from the first opening seconds. And then it goes to London, and it's just clean and pristine, and the odd car here, the odd car there. And I just thought it doesn't work. I think it would have been a lot better if we hadn't had that preamble, and we could have just experienced London, an empty London, and start it as a mystery, and then find out more behind what had happened. Anyway, that's by the by. So those kind of logical things annoyed me. Also, it becomes apparent during the film that the UK is in quarantine, and there are people around. You even see the odd aeroplane, which I love the moment where Cillian Murphy sees an aeroplane goes across. Amazing moment. But given that logic, suddenly these soldiers think they're so isolated, they have to capture these women and use them as breeding machines, in effect. And that logic doesn't make sense to me. It's only been 28 days. And I just thought...
I'm going to argue this point, I think.
Me too.
Yes, yeah.
The soldiers themselves, I've met quite a few soldiers, and not one of them has been a fuckwit, but the whole of this platoon, apart from Eccleston, who's amazing, are just complete fuckwits. And so I just didn't believe them.
Yes, I'm not so sure. I think I believed it very quickly, actually. I think maybe that's just sort of... I think I'm just quite cynical when it comes to that sort of thing. And particularly you get a bunch of people and hand them guns, I'm going to end up being quite cynical about it anyway. But I do think for me, yes, it actually did. I mean, it disturbed me, but it didn't bother me as a plot point. Um, it felt Rosanna, thoughts?
I think that was a good part of like the social commentary that they made, because in war times and in like war zones, it's often the first chance like people get to have no consequences for their actions. So like the collapse of society and laws. Some people have been waiting for that, you know what I mean? And that's when they would take the chance. So like, sure, if it's actually about them being like, oh, we had to repopulate society, I just don't think it's about that. I think that's like kind of an excuse they would use. So that's why that didn't bother me. I do have other issues with the logic, but yeah.
What were those issues out of interest?
Oh yeah. So my other ones I think are more about, well, first of all, like Selena's character. I think her character arc was a bit too fast, if you know what I mean. Like she went from, oh, I don't care about anyone else, like I'll kill anyway in a way, to being like, oh, I'm kind of dependent on this guy now. I know like she had to be in that situation, but suddenly I felt like she was helpless. Do you know what I mean? And she very quickly turned to liking Jim a lot. Like I could definitely see them liking each other like over a long period of time. And with some like more logic behind it. But then I also have an issue with the way people are infected, because I just feel like there's so many times where people are slashing these zombies and there's blood everywhere, and there's blood look like there's blood in their mouth and in their eyes and whatever. And then Frank, like Brendan Gleeson, is just shaking a little corpse, and one little drop ends up in his eye, and he gets completely infected. So it could be that they do get infected very easily and they were just lucky or whatever. But then I would like to see some more fear from Jim and Selena, for example, when there was blood splashing everywhere. Like when Jim kills that kid, he just like cautiously wipes off his little bat and then he like puts it over his shoulder, and that wouldn't have been me if that was the case. Let's just say.
Yeah, I'm more freaked out like than he was about the infected blood on his bat than I would be about washing my hands after going on the tube. Like it's I'm like, I need to get this off me, and I need to like, I wouldn't be using just a rag. I'd be wearing gloves. I would be like
Yeah,
disinfectant
yeah,
spray.
exactly.
Where's the PPE in this film?
Yeah, true. They are quite cavalier with it.
Exactly. And like at least you would like to see some kind of protection on them. Like they would surely try to wear some kind of mask or whatever, get it from the shops or whatever. And like it's okay that not everything is logical. Like for example, this virus, it's not real and everything, but some illogical things can just take you out of the plot a little bit, which is too bad. But otherwise, I think it was great. Like these are, I think, my only like main issues. Otherwise, like I think it was lovely. Like I don't normally like zombie films, and like very action-filled films, but it wasn't very action-filled, and I was drawn in from the very beginning. And I like to focus on, like you guys said before, like the humane and like yeah, and the relationships between humans rather than just the action and the attacks all the time, because that really gave the attacks a lot of power, and the attacks were really really scary, and the jump scares were so good, and they were done quite differently to other films like that I've seen. Yeah.
I think going back to the blood, I totally agree with you. Again, that was part of the logic that annoyed me. And at the end, there's this bit long kiss where Jim is completely covered in blood, and they have this big, long, passionate kiss, and I'm like, "What are you?" She's not even sure that he's not infected, like a few moments before, and then she realizes he's not. Something there's kissing, and he's got blood on his hands. If the film is completely crazy like Terrifier, I can let the logic slide massively. But the smarter the film, the more I want the logic to make sense.
I think that's fair enough. I think I've got just a slightly different criteria in that I think if I'm emotionally invested enough in the characters, I can often let logical slips pass. If And this is, I think, the writer it probably applies most to is Russell T Davies, because he's so wonderful with writing characters who go together and often not particularly good at logic. But often enough, he can write a relationship or a friendship well enough that I can look past certain things. And I think in this film, I was invested enough in the relationship between Cillian Murphy and Naomi Harris, and also Brendan Gleeson and his daughter.
Mm.
I was invested enough in those human characters that I felt I could put the issues that it had aside.
Yeah, that's really fair. Like I am able to do that as well. I think I was more looking a little bit more for faults just because of this. So normally I might have just let it slide, but now it's like I'm gonna take off tiny bit of points for it. But yeah.
One other thing that I think prejudiced me a little bit against it is I'm older than you guys, obviously, and I'd already before I saw this movie, I'd seen Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, Day of the Triffids, and this movie leans so much on all of those films. Just it literally lifts huge chunks out of those films and drops them into these. I it just every time I see it, like well, I guess they'd call it a homage. I would think, oh man, they would just take me out of the film. The soldier chained up is a really um, big one because that happens in Day of the Dead, and it's in the same context. So a platoon of soldiers, and they've got one of their comrades who's been um, transformed into a zombie, and they've chained him up to see what happens to him. And so that whole thing with Mela, because it was lifted, and I know that film so well, it did jar a little bit. And I think if people haven't seen those films, they will love this film maybe more. I think. Yeah. But I would still recommend this film to everybody, by the way, even though I'm not too keen. I think it's a great film, but like I say, there's things that just spoil it for me.
Mm.
Yeah, I saw it without seeing any of those films, and so it was the first film I'd seen that was like this, that had this particular story, this particular feel to it. So it was all very new to me, and I was a teenager when I watched it. So it was all very fresh and like really. I found it really captivating, and the story really took me. But I can imagine if I had all that backlog of seeing other things, because I read The Day of the Triffids after this, and I love The Day of the Triffids. But yeah, it is almost blow by blow. It's a very, very similar story. Somehow I appreciated that because I loved the book so much. I was like, oh, and there's a film that is of the book, but I haven't seen the actual Day of the Triffids film. Still haven't seen any of the Nights of the Living Dead or any of those films.
Oh my God! Wow.
We need to do that
What I
next.
will say about this film, though, just to be fair, is all of it is completely homage. I wouldn't want anyone to get the impression that any of it's plagiarism, because there is a lot of love for those earlier projects in this film, I think. So I think you could maybe argue that there's a bit too much love for some of these films, for Day of the Triffids. But it is all out of love, I think, all of those kind of little references, or even the big references as well.
Mm. Another really interesting thing I was thinking about is how I read that they filmed all of this with like regular little video cameras that like literally a family could have at that time, if you know what I mean. And I think there's something really, really good that came out of that is that apparently he was like inspired by this like Danish movement where you like scaled films down a lot. So like you were not allowed to use CGI. You were like you had to film on location. Like there was millions of rules, and he didn't follow all these rules. But apparently he was inspired by this, which made them use the camera in much more of an interesting way, I think. Like for example, there's a lot of like POV shots of the zombies. There's a lot of interesting like panning, a lot of like and surveillance kind of footage, like where it seems like someone is spying on Jim and stuff. I feel like from a lot of films I've seen recently, like this one is the most creative when it comes to the use of the camera. And I think that is because they're just using this very simple camera. And I think that was a very good idea.
It gave it a sort of documentary feel, I thought. It made it feel very it made it feel very real and very kind of, and the camera movements were almost primal sometimes, the way that they were shaking about. I don't know if anyone's seen The Thick of It, which is a totally different thing, political comedy, but the way that they filmed that was all handheld cameras. So it comes across as a documentary, and when somebody's running, their camera's shaking like that, and it means that sort of the sense of panic is transferred from the actor to the camera, to the or even through the camera operator, um, and and that really works. I think that comes across in this film as well. Is you are able to sort of soak up that panic through the camera work in a way that you might not otherwise.
So before we wrap up, well, any final thoughts?
I have some thoughts on the acting, which I think was really, really good. And I know you said that the surgeon guy stood out for you, Alex. But for me, I think actually Brandon Gleeson stood out the most. For some reason, he was the one who like emotionally affected me the most. But again, like I loved everyone's performance, but his was just the most touching to me.
Yeah, it was so like his joy, like in this crazy situation when Selena and Jim come across him at the flat. He's like, "Hello, cup of tea," or whatever he was like offering them. Like it was so like jolly. I feel like he brought the light energy. Yeah, and then it was especially hard when the what killed him was his own rage bubbling out. I felt it hit so hard, that death. The first time I watched the film, I was really upset.
So, thanks for joining us for our discussion of 28 Days Later. Tomorrow, we're going to be talking about 3 things that we think could improve that movie. And that's going to be quite difficult because 4 people here loved it. Next week, we're going to be talking about the sequel, 28 Weeks Later. In 2 weeks' time, we're going to be talking about the latest movie, 28 Years Later. So, hopefully, we'll see you again. You want me to give you a spoiler for the second one?
Do not give me a spoiler for the second one.
I'm going to give you one. I'm going to give you a spoiler for the
No.
second one. I prefer the second one.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's not a spoiler. That's just fascinating.